Okay. Kia ora, and welcome everybody to this third webinar in this series for the Connections Conference from Athletics New Zealand. The topic today, teenage question, how do we encourage our teens to stay in sport? Thank you for giving up part of your evening to be here, we really appreciate it. Just some housekeeping before we get underway. You should have been muted and your camera should be off, but if it isn't, if you could just click down in the left-hand corner, there is a little icon of a camera and a microphone. If you could just click that for us so it's switched off, just helps Zoom run a bit smoother and the experience that we have a little bit better. And this is obviously being recorded, so just a bit of a disclaimer, as it says on the bottom of the slide there, we use these on our website, on our resources, so people can watch them back, or if they can't make it this evening, there is an opportunity to go back and use the slides against the video and just watch those, which is something that we aim to do. Just in terms of the order of running, obviously your housekeeping we've just been through, we expect this to last about 60 minutes with some Q&A at the end. There are a number of preset questions, around 4 or 5 of them, which people have basically submitted when they registered. So we'll work our way through those. There's also an opportunity, if you have a thought or a light bulb moment throughout the slides and throughout the presentations, there's a chat function at the bottom. So if you just click the chat function and put your little question in there, we'll try and work through those towards the end. I'd now like just to hand you on to Fiona, who was our Young People's Lead and is facilitating the session this evening. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks for getting us started tonight. So firstly, thanks everyone for taking the time out of your evening to tune in. But I just wanted to start by managing expectations. So if you signed up and you've got a pen and paper to note down the 10 easy ways to keep teenagers engaged in your athletics club, we're probably not going to fulfill that for you today. So what we do want, though, is for you to join us on a bit of a voyage of discovery. So we know from anecdotal and actual evidence that we lose athletes from our clubs, but it's not a sudden loss at 13 or 14. Our kids are starting to move away from the sport as young as 9 or 10. And by the time we get to 13 or 14, we notice how few are left competing. So as the new young person's lead, I want to try and understand why this is happening and then help you try and make any changes necessary to retain more young people for a longer term. We've got to recognise that this is not a New Zealand problem. Worldwide, teenagers move away from active sport, and people a lot cleverer than me are trying to understand why. So my first step in trying to answer this question is to make sure we're not talking about young people without them being part of the conversation. So I've been involved in athletics for a long time, and it was my pleasure to get to know our first 3 panelists while they were still children competing for junior clubs in Auckland. So Aaron Booth, Aaron's completing his Masters in Sports Management through Long Beach State University, and he's also a decent decathlete. Hamish Kerr, who graduated from Massey University with a Bachelor in Agri-Commerce, he's a pretty good high jumper. And Simone Tafanai. So Simone has recently graduated from Auckland University and has landed a job at TVNZ in the sports department. She's a super fast sprinter as well. I asked the 3 of them to spend some time chatting about what athletics looked like for them as teenagers and what message they would like club administrators, coaches, and parents to hear. What they came up with was gold, and so I invite you to listen to this edited chat. Aaron's on the webinar tonight and can take any questions later in the evening. So Stu, if you'd just like to run that video, thanks.
Both of you have been pretty successful in athletics. At a time when you were growing up, I'm sure there were opportunities to pursue other sports. We'll start with you, Hamish. Are there any sports that you played in particular, and what was it that kind of kept you within athletics rather than pursuing something else?
Yeah, so I guess I started out like any Kiwi kid when I was like 5 years old. I pretty much just got enrolled in the local sports club, which was football at the time. And then I played that for a couple of years. Didn't really do anything in the summer. We were quite an active family, so we used to go sort of tramping and camping and do all that kind of stuff in the summer. So I suppose it was like that was sport as well, but in kind of like a less formal aspect. And then started playing rugby as well, and then played that all the way through primary school. But just loved PE, like I did volleyball and hockey and did some running. Like I always loved athletics day, but I never really did it formally. And then got into athletics. Joined my first local club when I was 10 years old, and that was Roskill South. And I guess the thing for me that probably kept me in athletics rather like more than any other sport was there was just like a real it's real measurable, and so you could tell when you're getting better, and that was something that really appealed to me. I had a really good group of mates who were down there who I sort of met through the process as well, and I guess the cool thing about having mates who you're competing with rather than in a team with is like, for me, like I didn't like team sports because you had to rely on other people, but it was really fun meeting all these other people who were your teammates and supported you, but at the end of the day your performance was your own, and so that was something that really appealed to me.
Yeah, so I dabbled in netball, did a bit of swimming, and I did a bit of water polo as well. So when I was heading into like intermediate around like 15, 16, my mom was like, you need to choose a sport because it's getting a bit too much with like pay wise, like it's getting really expensive. So I naturally gravitated to sprinting. I think it's because I enjoyed like the young, like Colgate Games, Trans Tasman, and the successes that I got from there as a young girl. So yeah, at the age of 16, I just chose athletics because I wanted to see how far I could go. And then yeah, ever since then I've still been doing it.
Yeah, I guess I was pretty similar. I started athletics at Glendine Athletics Club at like the age of 3, just getting taken along because my sister was going. Joined Waitakere at 8 years old, and throughout this whole time, like I was playing footy, and honestly, my thought process was do athletics in the summer to stay fit for football in the winter, because that's where I thought I wanted to go with my sporting career, was playing footy. And then yeah, there were times throughout junior athletics where I hadn't really grown yet, so results weren't coming. But like Hamish, you said, I think just having those like relationships with your mates who are always there, there's honestly what kept me around through those years that were a little tougher and that results weren't coming in. But then for me, I think the biggest turning point would have been my first Oceania games, Oceania champs, representing New Zealand in 2013. I basically came back from that competition and I told Dad, I'm done with footy. I want to do athletics, to his disappointment, because he's always wanted me to play for Arsenal. But we'll start the next question off with Simon. So when you look back at your junior athletics experience, what was your training environment like, and how important was that, as well as like the opportunities you got through various competitions?
I would say it was more intense than it was more fun. But looking back now, that's how my thought process is like. But during the time, I thought that was fun. But actually, it was very, very intense. Like I was running so much more than what a young teenager should be running. I was running like I was doing bush runs. I was doing like 5K runs, and all I wanted to do was sprint. But here I was overtraining, I believe, and because of that, I felt like I had a lot of pressure from outside noise, and I had a lot of self-inflicted pressure as well because of the early successes that I was getting from the competitions like Colgate Games. I thought that I had to stay on top of my game by training harder, training longer, and I would also do trainings outside of the training that was given to me because I just thought that I had to be the best. And because of that, I actually developed a lot of anxiety that I didn't know was called anxiety back in the days. But I'd be really scared going into competitions, knowing that if I got less than first place, and I would feel so angry and so disappointed, not only for myself, but just for my coaches and other people that supported me. But this was just Colgate Games. Like, it's not that serious. It's not that big of a deal. It wasn't like I was going to the bloody Olympics like Hamish was. But to me, those were the Olympics.
Yeah.
Those are the Olympics for me. So yeah, I really think that the whole fun wasn't really part of my training like I thought it was. Yeah, it was really difficult mentally and physically on my when I was growing up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at that age, Colgate Games, Trans-Tasman, Auckland Champs, even they are the big competitions of the year, and as an 11, 12, 13-year-old, they are your Olympic Games for the year.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can see why you do put so much pressure on it at a young age.
I didn't only see myself as a sprinter. I was also getting like people like I said, outside noise saying, oh, you know, your height, you're going to be really tall when you grow up, so you should really think about doing heptathlon because you know you have like natural strength. And so here I was dabbling here and there with long jump, high jump, and it was just like really deteriorating on my young body, trying to mature just like a normal teenage girl. I was like under eating as well because I was also getting other people saying like, oh, you don't look like a sprinter, or you don't look like a athlete. And they really played on my mind because, you know, when I was comparing myself to like other girls, I didn't look the way they did, but I was told I was supposed to look that way. So yeah, it was everything but fun, and that's so important.
I had people around me who wanted me to do better, and they wanted me to, you know, reach the goals that I had, you know, those goals, small goals that I did have. But they were equally happy if I just didn't turn up. And so for me, you know, as a young teenager, you know, I might train twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week if I'm having a big week. But for me, it was just like I'd do it if I could be bothered, and if I couldn't be bothered, I just wouldn't turn up. And I think that the days that I did go was the days because I wanted to go. I didn't feel like there was necessarily any pressure on me doing that. And I think that was kind of, I mean, I think it was amazing because it meant that when I did choose to train more full time, it was because I wanted to rather than because I felt like I had a need to. And then, I mean, I guess talking about the competition as well, like, I mean, I remember I did Auckland Champs just like you guys, and I did 1 Trans-Tasman. I never did a Colgate Games. I think I did maybe 1 Interprovincials, but for me, it was just like, I was just doing them because it was fun and because, you know, you got a day outside. My fondest memories for athletics when I was a kid was literally just sitting on the bank.
Yeah.
Like you do a little bit of competition, and then you just go sit in the sun and hope that mum will shout you like a bottle of chips or like a sausage sizzle or something, eh?
I did see some like early success in athletics from like the age of 8 to 10, but then yeah, after that was when boys started becoming men, and I kind of stayed a boy for the next 6 years. So honestly, I didn't really start actually training in any form for athletics until high school, like 13, 14. But even then, it was just go down to the track and we'd do little relay races over like 30 meters with each other, and it was just like a fun training environment where you were doing a bit of exercise and all that. But in terms of like, I mean, I've never specialized because I'm a decathlete, but I never really started training for the decathlon or did my first one until I was 18 or 17 maybe, but didn't really train up until that point. And again, it wasn't until I was 18 that I made the decision to solely focus on track and field. But I think my thought process as a junior, it was just something my first coach, Roy Williams, kind of said to me was, he was kind of the same build as me, a small, underdeveloped junior athlete, and then developed into a Commonwealth Games gold medalist. And yeah, my idea was I'd rather be a great senior athlete than to be a good junior athlete. And I think, Hamish, you sum that up. Like, you don't have to be the most amazing junior athlete to make it to the Olympics. Like,
I mean, look, I'm 6'6". Like, I spent 5 years of my life, like all through high school, with like shin splints, knee problems, like back issues because I was growing so much.
You
and
were
I was
6'6"
like, oh
as
man,
a 10-year-old though, right?
this sucks. Like, I'm never going to be a good athlete. But, you know, if I hadn't gone through that growth process and hadn't had those years of feeling like my body is just getting stretched apart, I wouldn't be here. You know, if I was still the same height as I was as a great 10-year-old, I'd still be jumping 155. And it's not really going to cut it.
How important it was creating like healthy and positive relationships with people you were involved with in sport.
For me, I think I kind of touched on it. Like, I was really lucky that I always did have quite a supportive network of people around me. My first sort of, I guess, more specialized high jump coach was a guy named Chris Travang, and he was based in Auckland, and it was when I was I must have been probably year 10 through to year 11, or maybe like year 9 through year 12. Yeah, it was roughly that that stage of your life where you don't really know what you're doing, and you're wanting to muck around and just have fun. And so he just was like, look, like, if you want to turn up, that's amazing, but if you want to go for a run or like play rugby with your mates or do any of that stuff, he was totally okay with that. And I think that really like nurtured this idea in my head that it doesn't matter like how amazing of an athlete you are or what you think your potential is, you're still just a person. And that's something that I still hold on to these days. I mean, that's one of my big strengths that I feel in my program that I run these days. It's quite easy from the outside in looking at the achievements that I've had and going, wow, like, you must feel so proud to be an Olympian and you know, do all these things and travel the world doing what you're doing. But still to these days, if I'm not happy and if I'm not feeling healthy in the way that I'm doing it, then that's more important to me than the results. And that's something that I've been very lucky that all my coaches have had that opinion. But I don't think it's like that in a lot of places in New Zealand. And I see it all the time at the track. You know, there's coaches who are trying to get athletes to do things which on paper might improve their athletic ability, but it's actually taking away from their development as a human.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that a lot of people forget is what's more important here. Is it getting performance and getting performance improvement from children and from young people, or is it getting kids to have, you know, positive and healthy relationships with their sport and just with their body in general, which is actually going to, you know, be much more beneficial leading into the years ahead.
It's so interesting to hear you guys saying that, like, you guys had a lot of good relationships with your past coaches, because I'm just like, wow, like, what the hell, that's possible like throughout your younger years? Because during my younger years, I did have a few good coaches, but I also had one or two coaches where I thought I had a good relationship with them. For me, trust is a big thing. So I believe whatever my coach says. So if my coach says, go run this because it's going to make you a better athlete, then I'll do it, because, you know, you're supposed to listen to your coach. Your coach is supposed to, you know, set a plan for you to be successful. Right now, my current coach, James Mortimer, hands down best coach I've had, and it's not just because of his achievement he's done with me, it's what he's done behind the scenes which nobody has seen, and which has helped my mental health and just my self-confidence in general. Going to James Morty, I was a broken athlete. I had a lot of toxic things that I had to unlearn and still unlearning to this day based on past coach experience. So he really worked on my self-confidence more than my performance as an athlete itself. You know, I feel like girls in general were very insecure just normally, but when you put a girl amongst other 10, like 8 girls in a start line, that shit's scary. So sorry, but that's really scary. And there's a lot of things going on our head as a girl, like you're like, wow, she's got an 8-pack, why the hell don't I have an 8-pack? She's wearing rundies, should I be wearing rundies? Like, us girls, we overthink so much. But going with Morty, he literally just worked on me as a person and me as an athlete. Like, it got to that point where Morty be like, you know, Simi, you should really go out and have fun. with your friends in the weekend. And I was like, I'm allowed to do that? Because my past coaches, if they found out I went out to go have fun, they would be angry. They'll be like, you shouldn't have done that. We've got goals and all that stuff. So going to him and hearing all these foreign things, it was so surprising for me, because I was like, I didn't know I could be a normal teenager. I didn't know I could have fun. And I think it's so important for coaches to be like, you come to training at these hours, but when you're done, you can live your life. You don't have to think about track the whole day, every night. And track was always on my mind 24/7.
That's all you want as an athlete, is to enjoy what you're doing. You did athletics as a young kid because you loved it, and if you're not doing it now because you love it, like, what is the point?
Why are you doing it? Yeah.
But I think that is really important, and it's a hard conversation, but it's making sure coaches understand that these goals are the athlete's goals. They're not.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be the coach's goals. And I think it's really important for coaches, especially at a junior level, to understand how much power and influence they have over athletes. And again, like you said, Simone, they're your coach, and as a coach, these young athletes trust you with everything you say. So I think it's really, really important for coaches to understand that, and to make sure that I don't think coaches ever do anything intentionally to make an athlete upset or hinder their performance in any way. But I think, they need to be conscious and aware that things that they can say and their actions do hold a lot of weight, especially to junior athletes.
But I feel like sometimes, because coaches know that they have this, the word's not power, but they know that they hold this certain trust with their athlete. I feel like sometimes I think that they can give advice, like within nutrition or within other areas that's not necessarily the expertise, like, they're experienced in. And I feel like that's also really important, because some of my former coaches would give me advice about nutrition and would come up with these crazy concepts. And then I'd go see a nutritionist and they'd be like, why are you doing this? Like, this isn't part of our plan. And then I'd be like so confused, so conflicted, because I have all these people saying this and that, this and that. And when in reality, the coach is a coach, there for a reason. And then you have these other people that you can go to for other aspects in your athletic journey. So yeah.
If you want to.
If you need it, you source.
Yeah, if you need it,
these other
exactly.
people. It's just share your 2 cents on what you think athletics within New Zealand can improve on to keep youth athletes in the sport, and continuing on into the senior grades. Hamish?
Honestly, like, just based on my experience with the sport, we've just got to make it interesting. Like, it doesn't have to be more than that. I think, like, I have so many parents come up to me and say, like, oh, look, my son's this age and jumps this high and he's ranked this in the interprovincials in South Island, and oh, he's going to go to Colgate's and these are his goals and stuff. And it's like, that's great, don't get me wrong, but like, does he enjoy it? Like, what's going on? Like, does he like turning up? Because like, for me, hearing those stories, I just want to know those kids are having fun, because I know that that's going to keep them in it. And understanding where athletics sits within these young people's lives is such a massive thing, because it's part of their development. And I think that if you play sport for the right reasons, you play it, because you want to get better and you want to improve yourself, then you can actually become a much better person because of it. And because of that, you can also, potentially become a great athlete. But I don't think that's the point. I think that if everybody everyone is successful in the sport just started out because they wanted to be an Olympic champion, we would have no one in our sport. Like, realistically, like, no one would do it, because it takes so many years and it's such a grind. You've got to just love it. And for me, I mean, I wake up every morning like, let's get into it. Like, I get to do this, amazing sport, which I just love doing. And it's not like I'm waking up every morning going, I'm going to jump 240 in 2 years' time. So that's like really motivating for me. Like, I couldn't care less. It's like, I just love doing it, and I'm just going to keep doing it for as long as I love it.
I had a conversation with Matt Wyatt, and we were talking about getting into the senior ranks, and we said, as you get older, you you don't remember the medals and the results and the achievements. You remember the memories and the experiences. So I think that has to be like first and foremost is just creating these positive, healthy experiences and memories for athletes, especially through that like high school age, because that's when kids do go and have fun with their mates playing team sports, and it's very easy to get taken away from athletics if you don't have that same sort of interaction and those experiences within the sport. So I think yeah, that has to be the biggest part is showing that there is a pathway, but making sure that kids enjoy themselves on that pathway and have, like for me, having an Oceania champs there as like a bit of a goal, but the whole time I was enjoying it because I wanted to get to that competition so I could be there with my friends. So
Your success isn't defined by your result at that competition.
no, because that's just one day of however many years you end up living. Both of you have been pretty.
So I don't know about you, but I found that really inspiring. And for me, I had at least another 10, 15, 20 minutes worth from them. So there was a lot of really good stuff in all of that. We've put up some key takeaways there that these three talked about, that it's not one size fits all formula. Every athlete is different and they all need something different. But what they do need is they need to be having fun, and they have to be able to enjoy all aspects of their life, not be consumed by sport. And I loved what Aaron said there, that the older you get, you remember the experiences and moments in athletics more than the medals or results. So as I was listening to those three, it reminded me of how busy my kids were with sport at secondary school. We know that teenagers live in a social world and there's so much demand on their time. So we invited Tony Rogers, who's chair of New Zealand Secondary Schools Athletics, to talk to us about some of the myths that surround secondary school sport and what he's seen in that space. Tony.
Yeah, greetings everyone that's managed to take some time out tonight on looks like a good night around the country. I'll try not to touch my mouse as it'll drop up the questions too quickly. So yeah, what I thought I'd explore first was a little bit of thought-provoking information around the secondary school sector and how it relates to clubs. And so I thought the way we can have a look at this was look at the relationship we have and what are the key things. So I'm not sure, we might have slipped ahead one. Have we? If you want to click one more slide for us, Fiona. Now here we are. So that's good. So what I wanted to do is, I've just, for some of you will know that I've been down here in Wellington for the last 6 or 7 months now in a new role as General Manager of Athletics Wellington, and I've started getting some insights in my first stage of the job to what's going on, particularly in the cross-country space. So I started doing some joint work with New Zealand secondary schools data and how that relates to the retention, if you like, which is really what some of this discussion is about, of our youth and what the data tells us first and foremost. So I think if you look at some of this data, it's quite thought-provoking about where our sport sits in the whole demographic of our population, if you like, as well. So first of all, at the very wet Hawera New Zealand Schools Cross Country Champs back in June, it was probably one of the worst weather days for one of those events. We still had 131 schools participate, and that was after it had been postponed last year due to our friend COVID, which was down a little bit on numbers. We usually get around 800 plus at this event, but Taranaki is not the easiest to get to, and of course with COVID around, not so many people were willing to book in, but we had 736 athletes enter. And it was, as I said, it was a real horrible day. It was probably, for anyone that was there would know, it was just one of those typical wet Taranaki days. Kept raining fully all day. By the time the first couple of races gone, the mud was all over the course. But to me, the most interesting thought about that was that the kids had a great time. because they enjoyed real cross country, as a lot of them put it. They didn't seem to mind the weather. It wasn't warm, it was definitely cold. And the fact that over or around half of them, almost half exactly, which was just about the maximum that they could take, were prepared to turn out the next day to represent their region in a team for the interprovincial cross country relay is significant to me. That shows one factor there, that teams mean a lot to these young people. So the first day they run for their school, the second day they run for their provincial area. But this is some of the interesting data that we need to look at with our schools. 33% of all the entries that day came from the 7 top schools to be represented. And all of these schools were either single-sex schools or fee-paying schools, which is a very pertinent point, I think, on where our sport sits in the school demographic. Of the larger schools in New Zealand, we've got 35 schools in secondary schools in New Zealand with over 2,000 students. Only 33% of them had no entries, and of those schools with 2,000 plus students, another third of them only had 5 entries. So from we had 15 entries in total from 2/3 of our largest secondary schools. Not sure what's giving me a message here to start my video for some reason. Fiona,
if you could just turn your camera on, please, Tony.
Oh, you want my camera on to talk to, so I can talk
Please.
to you? Okay.
Yeah, that's
no
better.
worries at all. Cheers. You want to see me talking?
Yeah.
That's good. So that, that to me is quite an interesting factor, that out of our large secondary schools around the country, as I said, only 1/3 of them had more than or had entries, to be fair, or more than 2 or 3 entries at the event, which means there's a lot of kids we're not reaching out to for that part of our sport, which is part of New Zealand's tradition. And there was only 1/5 or 20% of the schools that entered. Whether you looked at the top 20 or the top 40, the figures kept mirroring out that were entries from co-educational schools, so which obviously are still the dominant schools in our secondary school sector. So to me, that's a really pertinent thing to look at, is where are our athletes coming from that compete in the secondary schools. And I've done a little bit of data analysis of track and field. That's last year's track and field, and it's not too dissimilar. But the reason I did the more in-depth look at the cross country was, we'll come to you from here. The next slide. Thanks, Fiona. Yeah. Yeah, I can control it. Well done. So these are the top 15 schools, and you can see where the spread is. And for those of you online that are spread around the country, which is good to see, you'll note that if you look at the names of those schools and you think about people in our sport or staff at those schools, you'll know that there's something that's in common with all of them. And that's to me is a critical thing with our schools, is that we've got to have a driver that's facilitating athletics with passion in the schools. Once upon a time, it was definitely part of health and phys ed curriculum, but these days athletics isn't. So we need to recognize that as a sport and say, what more can we do to help be a driver? So as you can see there, out of those top 15 schools, there's only a couple of co-ed schools, one being St. Peter's, Maclean's, and Havelock North. I think those are the only, a quick glance from memory, those are the only co-ed schools there. Out of the top 15 schools for entries, out of the 130 odd that went to the New Zealand schools. So the big question is, what does this tell us as clubs, and how can we help as clubs? So my view is that clubs need to recognise, for the schools that had poor or no attendance, and we're talking about some of our very big schools, particularly from, obviously they were in our metropolitan areas, had no entrance at an event like the New Zealand Schools Cross Country. So we need to think as clubs what we can do to support that. And with the next thing, I did a little bit of transfer of the data to promote a little bit more thinking on our local scene. How well does the school participation transfer to club or centre participation? and how well do we think our clubs are engaging and considering student needs. So if we have a look at the data that I've sort of done some work on here in the Wellington region. So if we take at the bottom here, the New Zealand secondary schools cross country, from the Wellington regional secondary schools, there was 122 entrants competed. Whereas locally, I think this is the really important thing to even look at more. So we'd expect to go to Hawera, that's not going to be quite as high, but at the local Karori, Wellington Scottish Club sponsored Karori Relays, which is a 5-team cross-country relay over 2Ks in Karori Park here in Wellington. There was over 220 athletes competed, once again, actually probably in as bad conditions as the weather was at Hawera, but they still turned out from their local schools in the afternoon to come and do this relay. And we had just on 250 at our local College Sport Wellington Cross Country Championships. That number's nowhere near as high as it used to be either, though, and that's tailing down. But what I want people to recognise is then if we transition those age groups across to our local Athletics Wellington Cross Country and Athletics Wellington Road events, which were held in August and then late September, you can see the numbers are very, very poor in relation to that school team situation, that most of them went away with their teams to compete in their school championships, if you like, even if it's nationally in a local relay for schools, which was just an afternoon off school, or the actual championship cross country. So the questions then is how well does this local data tell us about our current population, and what are our clubs providing that are or not providing, probably more pertinent question, that our schools are providing for these young people, and what type of events, whether they be club or regional events, appeal to our youth. We need to ask that. And when do our youth want to compete, and what ticks the box for them? You know, these are the big questions to me about how we're going to engage people. And I'm just looking at it from a cross-country point of view, because it's not as complex, if you like, as the multidisciplines that we have of track and field. But that's even more important for us to focus on as well and ask the same questions. Next slide, thanks, Fiona. So then, when I was talking with Stuart and Fiona about this, what I've, over my 5 years at the largest secondary school in the country as a secondary school, as the sports director, and then for 4 years as the executive director for Waikato Secondary School Sport, I've had the opportunity to do some insights with small youth forums, as well as some surveys of our young people around sport in general. And I thought I'd show the responses to a group that I had, which is in a local co-ed setting in the Waikato, of some of the reasons they say why they're not playing sport in the school setting. And I think there's some really important ones for us to think about if we reflect back on the questions that I put around our clubs in particular, if we're going to attract them from playing sport or not play, or try and encourage them to play sport. Because remember that when we're working in clubs, we're dealing predominantly with our sport outside school hours. So there's some things that we can fix. There's some things from there that's not so easy. I've highlighted a couple though, and I'll officially highlight the top one, because that one there was probably one of the most pertinent things that I gathered from a very large survey across the school when I was at Rangitoto College, which really surprised me. I had this perception, I suppose, going up to the North Shore that, you know, there was plenty of money for everyone and people didn't have to worry about it. But after about a year there, I realized that for many of the parents, they were what I'd call maybe quite asset rich, but cash poor. And the kids being quite perceptive young members of families up there, they didn't like to put pressure on their parents to play sport for the cost of uniforms, the cost of going to tournaments and things like that. So that's a really important thing, obviously, which is possibly not always thought about, even in the higher decile schools that we have around our country. Obviously, one that we can help with across all sports is not enough coaches. Another big one here is that we, you know, make it too serious for kids. The sport's not fun anymore, and that really echoes with the sentiments of our three great panelists that we've just listened to, and injuries pulling kids out. And this is another really important one for the clubs around the country to think about. What are we offering in terms of changing facilities? It's when the school setting, they talked about getting smelly and sweaty for class if they were trying to do sport during their school day, lunch times when lots of teams practice and stuff like that. And this, I've highlighted this in green here. This was also the top issue that came back from one of the Sport New Zealand Voice of Participant or Voice of Rangatahi surveys done of things that students would like to see improved in the school setting as their changing room facilities. So, you know, we know that's really important to young people these days. Social images, you know, the look and feel. Simone spoke a little bit about that. Is of great value, and of course, our young people today live with social media, and it's so easy for things to get out of proportion for them. So, you know, they don't necessarily want to have large-scale open changing rooms. Much more in favour of, you know, small cubicles or private changing rooms, so that they don't get the bullying and teasing that can go on in our space. So that's something we've got to be conscious of as well when we invite young people into our club situation. So yeah, there's just some thought-provoking things there, but obviously young people are very busy in some settings. And to lead into our next presenter, Charissa, who's going to touch a little bit on balance is better, I thought I'd share a few of my memories that lead to ideas for the future of when I grew up as an athlete. And it was great to listen to our three panelists, and I wrote down a few things that were very similar for me, that made me maybe focus in later life. So, yeah, like the three, I started off in a children's club. I was a member for 3 years, I think, but it became the same old each year, the same challenge, the same kids finishing in the same place, I think, in everything I did, second or third. And so after 1 year of doing that, at intermediate school at year 7, I decided to give away children's athletics. Instead, I joined the swimming club and played a lot more team sports like softball, tennis, and rugby in the winter, which was, of course, my first passion, and cricket. Then, I guess in my youth at Fairfield College, where I was a student, I was fortunate enough to get a little taste of success, which sort of lit the light bulb, so to speak, is that, oh, maybe I could be okay at the sport if I did a little bit of training, because I managed to win the cross country in year 11, as it was, fifth form in those days, and that gave me a little bit of positive self-image. And we had a great supportive school program through our HOD of PE, Mr. Leon at the time, and in '73. That just happened to coincide with my sixth form year, was the first in the inaugural secondary schools champs, which gave me my first trip to the South Island, which was a marvellous experience with a whole bunch of mates from the school. So it's that team aspect again, which really sold it to me that I wanted to do this a little bit more seriously. Still playing first 15 rugby though, first 15 for 2 years there, and even in my final year at school, I did everything and was managed to be a senior champion, and believe it or not, triple jump, hurdles, high jump, probably not to your extent, Hamish, and the 800 and 1500. But all during that time, rugby was my priority, still at that age. And even at my first year at university, still rugby was my priority sport. Made under 21 reps while I was still 18 in that first year. We had a great local Hamilton Athletics Club with a lot of young people in those days, where we did track, but we also, as a club, we had some people with good vision in the club who organised the club, young athletes, the teenagers in the club, to play business house volleyball and basketball and things like that, which kept those critical club connections. We also had a fabulous vehicle for club athletes in those days, which was the National Athletics League, which was a club league around the country for those athletes that weren't necessarily going to be high performers. I think that was a really important thing. But the emphasis there was that, as you can see, even at 18, I didn't do any early specialization. And following on with the the message that Simone put. It was really my parents that put pressure on me in my second year at university to actually stop trying to be, excel in 2 key sports by then, which was athletics and rugby. So I said I'd give rugby away for a year, and that was the end of the story. Later, got some words of wisdom from the great Arthur Lydiard that he says, if you'd actually started doing some serious training like some of those Aucklanders, you could do all right. So I thought that's another story. It gives us some thought about what we can do in clubs to help our young people create that social environment with their peers. So we can see for takeaways, we need to think about drivers in schools if we're going to get a better uptake, what events our centres can run and modify to engage our younger athletes and embed them into athletics for longer, and when and where can we stage events to make them more accessible for our youth. That's really important. We know we stick to our traditional Saturday afternoons around the country in most places. So yeah, hopefully there's a few thoughts there. And
Thanks,
the most
Tony.
important thing is to sit down with our youth and see when they can do things and what they want to do.
That's great, Tony. Thanks very much for sharing that. I know we've done lots of talking. You might be getting some questions starting to brew in your mind. Feel free just to put them in the chat room down the bottom, and we'll get to them after our next speaker. So I thought it was really important to seek advice from an independent group, someone who's able to hear from young people across a variety of sport and who have created strategies based on fact and best practice. So Carissa Barham is a sports consultant from Sport New Zealand. She tells me she could talk for hours on some of these key points, but tonight she's just going to broadly overview and dig deeper into 1 or 2 key concepts. Thanks, Carissa.
Nā mihi, Fiona, kia ora koutou, ko Teresa tuku ingoa, kei te noho hau te mātua Māui, kei ahi Aotearoa Sport Development I mahi ana. I live in the Mighty Hawke's Bay team, so and I do have some kids. I've connected to a few of the stories tonight who do athletics. Cherie, I'm not sure. I thought I saw you on there. If you're Cherie from Hastings Athletics, she'll know my kids well. I connected with a few of the stories around late developers and having kids who are in that space at the moment. But my role here tonight, so at Sport New Zealand, I've come out of a physical education and health background, more recently at Netball New Zealand, around leading the secondary school space there and, game changing as to what that could look like. And just previously this year started in at Sport New Zealand. So I'm probably here to give you a bit more of an overview around Balance is Better, why we're going down this track, and especially as rangatahi are our key part of our Sport New Zealand strategy for the next 3 years. And we're investing, as you know, into some of our partners around Balance is Better, and we started off with the top 5, or not top 5, the big 5 participation team sports, and now we have more on board that are committing to change around Balance is Better. So really keen to hear. It's really hard in the virtual world. I can't see your faces out there, but I know there's some great minds and some great thinking that understand their own contexts really well. So we may not get to answer all these questions tonight, but if you have a burning question about Balance is Better, can you put that in the chat? It might actually help inform some future discussions, and kind of even for Sport New Zealand, what's front of mind for you guys. And then from your perspective, before we dig into it, what does Balance is Better mean to you? It's thrown around quite a bit. It's had quite a bit of media coverage around it, but we are discovering through some of our leadership work that we do with the sports sector that there's still a wide range of understanding around what it is as well. So I'm going to play tonight by going over the problem we're trying to solve, the definition around it, and then dig deep into the 3 myths. Whether we get to all 3, well, we'll just see how time goes. Fiona, you can be my timekeeper here, because as I said, we could probably be here till midnight unpacking this space. But the story of Balance is Better came back from the talent plan, for those who've been in the sports sector for a while, a long time ago. And it's based on a lot of evidence that's been collected over time that regardless of the ability, needs and motivations of young people, that they should all have a quality sport experience. And what we've seen is that 80% of our resources go to 20% of our kids. And I wrote down a few of the notes from you know, the early successes of Simone contributing to eternal impressions, and that, you know, all kids deserve to have a quality coach, and how important that quality coach was in those early years, and the importance of fun and friendship. And that really plays out through our secondary school age review, through Voice at Rangatahi, Tony mentioned. That is on our website, and I can share that with Fiona and Stu after if you ever want to unpack the evidence of that a little bit more. You know, probably this may not be new to you, but the challenge we are trying to solve, and it's important before we even get started that we actually look at why, you know, Balance is Better isn't plucked out of thin air. And the main problem is that from about the age of 12 to, and we know now 15 is the steepest drop that just came out earlier this year. And actually pre-COVID and post-COVID physical activity levels have dropped 6%. So on top of this challenge we're trying to solve as well. And it's not new just in New Zealand, it's global. And we're trying to unpack why and solve and try and reframe what we do in sport to best kind of stop that steep curve of drop off and lift it up a little bit. We also know that the physical activity experiences that young people have aren't meeting their needs at the moment for a vast majority of them, and we don't get our physical activity levels back up into adulthood, which leads to further health outcomes. So hence why there's a bit of a targeted approach around the secondary school space, and sport's got a pretty amazing vehicle. I'm a little bit biased. I've had great experiences in sport, so I'm really aware that out of that lens that there are some kids that aren't having those experiences and dropping out. So over time, we've had a massive drop in participation, and it's still dropping. It gets really low from the 18 to 24-year-olds, and big drop in club membership. I think Tony alluded, in different sports that we work with, there's a secondary schools, understanding secondary schools, the needs of kids, the purpose of secondary schools, and then where clubs fit. So the conversation around club and school sport and what each can enable. And I agree with Tony around finding the champions in schools. There's been, Clive Pope's done some research around teacher drop-offs in sport, and it's decreasing even more. And a lot of the work that's going on behind the scenes at the moment is really trying to address teacher engagement in sport. When there's good teacher engagement in sport, there is better retention of the kids in sport and better transfer into the club environment. And I think I saw Napier Girls on there too, Tony. So my daughter's at Napier Girls, and I know Sheila, who coaches there, has been a champion of those runners there for a wee bit of time. And, you know, those people are really important in the time that they give. We're also well aware of the child and youth wellbeing stats around mental health. So it's a really, really big picture of chaos. And we know it's really complex. The sport system is messy. There's so many competing factors on these young kids around NCA, around digital, and we know change. And I think, Fiona, you framed it up really nicely at the beginning, that actually it's not, well, there's not a single recipe that's going to succeed in this change. It's going to be multiple different angles of making change, whether it's changing events calendars, it's helping coaches understand what's a better experience for young people, how to change our offerings to increase the participation. So it is messy, especially in the secondary school space. And at Sport New Zealand, we've generally seen, say in the netball example, where they've removed year 7 and 8 reps and put in development programs, that it's reasonably easier to start at that younger age. But once they get to secondary school, there's so many competing factors, we kind of scratch around the surfaces a little bit. So being able to start with 1 or 2 key changes in the complex world is key, and not just keep going down the same track of what we've always doing. We're going to keep getting the same results. Probably just want to reinforce what Tony said and what's coming through, so much evidence, but are we listening? And an area I'm quite passionate about and started to work on in netball was understanding youth and asking them and how to customize their offerings in netball to cater for them. And it really comes across, and I think Balance is Better gets a bit of a bad rap that it's not catering for the competitive kids, but it was really cool to hear Aaron, Hamish and Simone today talk about, you know, what's really important is their healthy relationship with their sport, whether they're a competitive kid or a social kid, or they move in and out. It's really hard for a kid to come in and out of a sport, their fun, their friendship. So that's probably nothing new. What lovely Athlete Voices said earlier, supports the evidence it's telling us, and they actually all want to learn new skills. Even the social kids, they all want to learn and be better than develop their competence. We do know, we just found out that they develop their competence, or what they think is their competence, at the age of 9 in their gender identity. So it's reasonably early in their piece. So by the time they get to the secondary school, some of these kids have decided if they're good or not, and have kind of laid the foundation of their future decision making, you know. And this is Sport Waikato actually, you know, what kids were telling them: yes, no way, they want what's fun, they want to try new things, they want to be with their mates, and their motivations change. So especially into year 11 to 13, health and well-being becomes a really big driver of their motivations, especially for young women. I'll take a little bit of a breath. I am racing, so my apologies. So please throw any questions into the slide. But one of the 3 key issues we are trying to solve is, and all the myths we talk about, is child success is not a reliable predictor of future success. Being able to identify athletes early and a focus on winning rather than development. So a few programs that we've got: Good Sports, a climate of development versus performance. And what a lot of sports are really grappling with at the moment is, when do we start identifying athletes? What is early specialization for our sport? You know, athletics could be very different to netball, to hockey, to gymnastics, to swimming. So, and that's this individual sports context, and something as Sport New Zealand we can't answer, something you guys will have to grapple as you go. So if we would unpack each of these issues and really quickly, when we think about planting the seed, I'll put a little bit of evidence towards it. But, you know, generally success is, you know, a lot of kids and a lot of parents out there, and parents, bless them, they want what's best for their kids as well. We all do. But we, you know, you've probably seen this before. It really looks higgledy-piggledy. It's all over the place. We also know the transference rate, a little bit biased here with netball as well, a bit of a netball background, but the transference rate to the top end from the representative is only, across sports, is around 7%. So it's not a huge bit that transfer up there. So where are we putting, and it begs the question, where do we put our resources, and how do we increase that earlier participation? And then from a traditional pyramid model of what we see, 16.4% go up the pyramid step by step in the linear way. The ones that get to the top, actually 83.6% of them go all over the place and come in and out. So how can we create a more, dare I say it, a chaotic kind of approach where they can come in and out of the participation through the different levels at different stages? This was one drawn at a sport leader residential. We had Mariah from Athletics New Zealand earlier this year on it, and it was around like the narrow pyramid and how, you know, it gets narrower and narrower, and that's just natural attrition as you get to the top, and only so many go to the Olympics. But actually the ones that drop out, there's a bit of a dodgy net under the bottom, and we're losing them through the cracks. So I thought it was quite a cool different way of looking at the pyramid model as well. So whatever model sport lands on, I don't think anyone's actually got the right model yet or drawn the right picture around the pyramid, but we're all grappling with what that looks like, that it isn't such a linear journey through those secondary school years. And I think it was that Hamish that mentioned that he grew quite late and all those growing pains, and, you know, if we had let him drop off at some stage through those growth phases, well, we may never have known how good he could have been. The hard thing here is I can't see you for a bit of feedback. So let's look at issue 2. I'm just going to take you on a journey with it around early identification and specialization. So you kind of like paint the picture. This is a seed. If anyone can guess what that seed is right now, anywhere along the journey, put it into the chat. If you know what plant that is going to be, then you tell me right now. If you do get it, I'd give you a prize, but I don't have a prize on me. There, you have a look at that. You know, like how early do we identify the talent on there? Is it early in this piece? Is it when they're a seed at the little? Is it when they've just popped into a plant? If anyone knows what that plant is yet, then please tell me. You might know what the plant is about now. Maybe those who live up in Tauranga might give you a bit of a clue. And that is actually what it is. And what I love about this is it really grapples with each sport with where you specialize and where you ID. And talent ID is a really hard one. Do we ID them, the ones who win all their 100-meter sprints at the age of 11 and 12, or is it 14, 15, 16? And in netball now, they've moved from year 7, 8 and kind of their early reps, their first national tournament is 18. So where in that secondary school space should identification occur? And I don't have the answers. I'm really just kind of asking the questions for you guys to grapple with in your own context. We do have a little bit of research around early specialization for a kid of 12. Are they training more than 8 months of the year in that one sport, especially in that year 7 and 8 space as they transition into secondary school? Do they play only one sport? And have they quit other sports? And I thought this was quite a cool one, just a really simple frame to go, well, actually, and I think one of the earlier athletes today mentioned that they had summer athletics in the summer. It's a great foundation for their winter sports. So being able to cycle that and how important allowing them to have their summer and winter codes are. We talk about selection a lot. So this is if we look at a system of selection, so many kids go to these sports and they're selected and 10 succeed, but we actually don't have a lot of evidence on the ones that drop out and what we do for them. It's a bit like that dodgy net. How do we capture those? So where do we draw a line of selection? What does selection look like? And at the end of the day, it's a double-edged sword, because if you select them too early, they burn out, drop out, overloading, lots of pressures. And actually that really resonated with me with what Simone said. I hadn't thought about that. With her early success really contributed to the pressure she had put on herself, and then the outside pressures, and then the voices in her head, and it led to a whole lot of, I had to go to this event and win. So some really cool real life stories, and this is a reality for our young people with the pressure that's on them and what they're doing. And then probably the next one I'll just want to kind of leave you with is the winning versus development climate. This is a life of a young person at the moment. They've got competing pressures. COVID's probably added another element to it as well. They've got school versus club, and Tony highlighted the transference of school, and then probably not as many in club in the cross-country space, and then regional, national, their parents' expectation on them, that they might have 4 or 5 coaches that they're dealing with in different codes. They've got their RSO, then they might have the NSO, and then they might be in some leadership program as well. So just really putting the kid and the athlete back at the center, and are we doing that in what we're doing in the systems that we're offering? Have we asked them what they want and what's gonna work for them? So just to wrap up, it was a little bit of let's say it was a 100-meter sprint on Balance is Better. But these are the principles that we've landed on that are driving a lot of what we're doing at Sport New Zealand. So it's got to be safe, fair and inclusive. We're really going, that's why they went up for the signed agreements at NSO level. Look, we're committing to this. We're going to grapple with this. We know it's going to be complex and messy. We know we're not all going to get everyone on the journey at the start, but we need to be bold and courageous, or we'll keep telling the same story around that collective attitudinal change. And we're looking at intergenerational change. So we're not expecting it to change, within the next year or two. Lots of variety, balance without doing too much, a great experience for all. We're all, kids have told us sports aren't working together. So how do we do that? They all want skill development, and ideally talent ID occurs as late as we can in their growth and development. So Fiona, that is the fastest Balance is Better presentation. I've never been a 100-meter sprinter, but I felt like I talked like a 100-meter sprinter today.
Thanks, Carissa. We as we were going through some of this, I did say to Carissa, maybe we'll have to get you back on to do a special Balance is Better. So let us know if that would be of interest to you, because I'm sure she'd be fine to do that with us. So I know we have opened lots of doors tonight. We haven't actually gone through all that many of them. And for me, that's actually okay. This is a journey that we're on around retaining young people, and we need to do some learning before we decide on too many actions. So Athletics New Zealand has invested in finding some solutions. And for me, I want our clubs and centres to be part of finding that solution. So we have some thoughts that are beginning to form, and listening to young people helps us to clarify those thoughts. But we also need to hear from you. I'm sure that some of you have already seen some examples of things that are working, and I'd encourage you to get in touch with me so we can talk some more. So we've got a little bit of time left, not a lot, and thank you for those of you who are holding on. If you've got some questions, something that you want to put in the chat box, do so. Do that now. We also had a few questions earlier from people as they were registering. So I'm not too sure what's happening with the slides there, but Stu, have you got those questions there?
Yeah, can you see that? So the first question we've got, and obviously to the panel, what support is available for young up-and-coming athletes high school age? I guess you can join in on this, Fiona, as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not too sure where they're coming from, where the question came from around what support you were looking for. And so I guess part of my question back would be, this is the conversation we have with our young people. What is it that you're looking for? Is it that we need more coaches, or is it that we need to identify more squads? Same number of coaches, bigger squads. So if we can unpack that question a little bit more about what support are you looking for, and thereby what is it that we need to do to help find that support?
I guess that person can reach out to ANZ if they need to.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Just moving on. So how do I attract teenagers to the club when they have loads of other options?
Such a good question. I did fire these questions out to our panel a little bit earlier today, and I'm wondering if I can fire it to Aaron. Aaron, are you on the call?
Yes, I am. Thanks for having me. Attracting teenagers to clubs. I think it is hard. Obviously for me, it's hard to stay involved if you aren't seeing a lot of success. Especially for me, that was definitely something that kept me in the sport. But at the same time, there were years, especially through 14 to 18, where I didn't have any of that. I don't know. I think it was came down to just my general love of athletics. I enjoyed it. I still had people around me. A lot had dropped out, but the ones that were still there, I had good relationships with them. So even though I wasn't successful like I was, it was still fun. And there was a question in the chat about what does fun look like for young people. And yeah, it was just being around mates. I was training with my sister as well. So just different things like that, I think, is important. Other people probably have ideas as well. That there's probably the biggest thing that I struggle to figure out is how to keep more kids in the sport through that age, especially when there are other sports coming up, work comes up, uni comes up. So it's probably one of the biggest things that we need to try and find answers for, I guess.
Yeah, and I think too, it's important to reflect on the fact that athletics is a foundation sport. We know that there's lots of options for kids. And part of the conversation that we had with Hamish and Aaron and Simone was about that healthy attitude to an active lifestyle, as opposed to we have to hold them at track and field. We're creating these great experiences, great sporting experiences for our young people that mean that they continue being active right through into adulthood. And I think that needs to be the important part of where we're coming from.
Okay, just moving on to the next question. So how do we encourage club athletes who just enjoy the sport to continue after grade 14? I'm not sure if that's 13. It can feel like the senior section only want the top athletes. Has anybody got any wisdom for that one?
I think, sure, if you can solve that one, you've solved what Aaron was talking about. You're understanding their needs a little bit as well. That's the magic question, isn't it, around how to customize your offering. So your kids have decided quite young if they're good or not, and they, you know, if they've got good family support, they stay in it. But through those pubertal years, they're self-conscious and they're not sure, they're unsure about the body. How do you create other offerings? Maybe, and you're just throwing something random out there, maybe the young people should design what that should look like for them. Those kids, ask those kids. They'll come up with some amazing ideas that I'll put myself in the older category. Aaron will put you on the younger one still. That you could be a part of facilitating some of these young groups to see what they comes in and give it a go.
Yeah, just adding to that as well is that, you know, a lot of the things that the kids have been doing, if they've been in an age up to grade 14, and they've probably been going through children's athletics for so many years, but that becomes boring if it's the same thing happening all the time. So we've got to encourage clubs to be bold and give a variety of experiences as they go up the age groupings. And that's the same. And I'm going to chuck this one back at Charissa, because in my roles in the secondary school sector, netball was the hardest for that, and we had massive dropouts in the top years of secondary school for netball. I'm sure you have noted that, Charissa, and I did some forums in the Waikato as well as at Rangitoto College. And it's because they were doing the same thing that they've been doing all the time. Now, that's hard to change in the teams sport when you play it on the court and you turn up, but you play the same teams if you live in the same environment all the time. And it's the same for athletics. If we keep providing the same opportunities, which only accepts winners, really is what the question is saying, I think. What do we do with the kids that make up the rest of the club? Are we providing team environments for them? And that's really important. I mean, that's what I was trying to highlight with my data around the relay factor that was so valuable to our young teenagers. A lot of them weren't winners by any stretch of the imagination, but some of them held onto the hope that they might be the slowest runner in their school that made up a team to get a 6-man team medal at the New Zealand Schools cross country, and they might have finished like 75th the day before or something like that, or in the actual race, you know. So we've got to provide a vehicle. And if I reflect back to my youth, when we had a really meaningful national athletics club league going, I'm sure that's what kept like so many of us in the sport that weren't seen to be champions when I was a 17-year-old.
And I think, you know, as I've indicated a couple of times, this is a journey that we're on. It's a journey of discovery, of conversation, of listening to the voices that are out there and what it is that they're telling us. And part of that journey is that we will be, hopefully in the near future, developing an Athletics New Zealand Youth Council, where we do have those young voices who are telling us what it is that they would like to see, what sort of program they think would be good. We're not going to make wins every time, but at least they can give us some ideas. And as I've been reflecting, you know, as someone who's been around the sport for a long time, if we had the answers, we would have already done it. So it's time to start listening to our participants a little bit more and giving them a platform, I think, where they can share safely what it is they'd like to try.
And then moving on, this is probably for you, Tony. Anybody else, just jump in. How can clubs work with the schools to support the traditional models of athletics and help the school athletic days run well? Any ideas?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one, because as I said in my earlier chat, unfortunately, athletics is not so much the domain of the phys ed program as it was a generation ago. And Charissa also mentioned the study by Clive Pope of the number of teachers involved in sport. So it's really hard. And of course, our sport, particularly track and field, is quite complex to run. And as time's gone on, we've become more risk adverse in secondary school space as well, of how we manage running our athletic events. So, you know, we don't expose the kids to as many events as we could to let, as we know, our sport is for all shapes and sizes, depending on the discipline you can do. So to let them all experience that. So really hard, but that's where our clubs just need to just, you know, make an approach to schools and say, can I help you with your annual athletics day? Because not only is that an opportunity to help and build that relationship, it is an excellent opportunity for your clubs to do a little bit of talent ID, and sort of then you can have some one-on-one conversations, or say, hey, you know, come down to the club and let's see what else you can do, things like that. If you've got a few really good volunteers in there helping. Very hard, because I know many schools push back on that sort of involvement, but it's about it's a long-term relationship that schools and clubs need to make, and it's worked successfully with some sports, and it really does depend on the environment.
Yeah, I think just to go one step further there as well, something I talk to clubs about quite regularly has been understanding where your participants come from, you know, which communities, which suburbs of your city, which schools, you know, and those pathways, and then focus some of your energy there in terms of building those relationships. You know, we've mentioned schools there, so how many people have relationships with the sport director, you know, the sport coordinator, the principal, the teachers, and just trying to build those links, build robust links between your club and the school. Just one question we have in here in the chat from Rob at Fielding Muller. Hi, Rob. Rob says, fun is a common theme. What does fun look like to young people? What things can we change?
Yeah, I think, Aaron, you're probably the youngest of us.
Yeah, I was going to add something a little earlier, and it does it bounces off the whole team aspect. And a lot of the stats that Tony was putting up kind of hinted towards that. There was greater participation where there was a team aspect involved. And I think I'm quite unique compared to the other two that were on talking, Hamish and Simon, that I went to the US, and that is all about teams. We've got, it's almost like a generational and like a thing where you grow up and they want to compete in the NCAA. Doesn't matter what sport it is, every kid just wants to be at the NCAA level. So kids will travel all over the country to compete at any school they can. They'll pay out-of-state tuition because they've got this big goal and big aspiration growing up that this is where I want to be. And when they get to the team, every weekend you're trying to make the team to travel to get points for your team. It's the culture there is so much different. And I don't know if there's a way that, for me, top 10 and those competitions were always my favorite, because there was just such a big team aspect and everyone was cheering for everyone. And I don't know if there's a way that, like back in the 90s, I've spoken to my coach about this, and there were team and regional competitions where you collect points and you may be the 5th best athlete in the 100 meters for your club, but you're scoring points for the club. And if there's some incentive there, and maybe it transfers into going from the junior age groups into like the school level and high school, it doesn't matter if you compete for club or school, maybe all of those points could be for your school to help boost those levels. And then once you transfer out of high school back into like university or something, it all goes back to a club. And reading some of the comments in the chat, I think that's going to help create some sort of connection with your club. Like you've got, like what Nick Fee said in the chat, you have a great connection with the club and its members. You develop that over time. It's just going to help create like a culture around the club and around the sport in general. I don't know, they're ideas I've had just from my experiences in the US, because it is completely different. It doesn't seem like a individual sport. Once you get over there, it's definitely a team, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And we have heard that a bit. Tony and I have had a conversation around this. You know, we have athletes who return from the US and they talk a lot about the team and the collegiate system. And if any of you were on the webinar last week with Laura Nagel and Bayes Babes, she talked a lot about that. I'm actually meeting with Laura next week to talk this through. What does it look like? You know, let's be brave. Let's be courageous. Let's try doing something different and see what happens. So yeah, it is kind of a watch this space. It is kind of a put your hand up and be prepared to take some risks. It might not work the first time, and it might take a generation to change, but we're better to make the first step rather than just hope that it gets better. So there was a question up there that I saw about the youth council and only including those still involved in the sport. How do we capture the feedback of those that are left to understand why? We've just actually recently done some focus groups, and a number of the young people aged 15, 16, 17 on those focus groups were actually kids who were undecided as to whether or not they wanted to come back to the sport anyway. So in order to capture that, we're using previous databases, last year's database, and we're saying to these young people, it doesn't matter if you've decided yet whether or not you want to be part of the sport, we still want to hear from you. So there's still opportunity to do a bit of that, because I think it is important. If we constantly focus, and Carissa challenged me on this just last week, if we constantly focus on kids who are successful, are involved, seem to be going through well, then we're only going to get the answers that we want and the answers that we already know. We need to listen to those kids that aren't getting what they need from our sport and see what might need to change.
Thanks, Fiona. Are there any more questions people want to throw in the chat just before we wrap up? I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Scratch the surface. Yeah, this is my shameless plug time. So we're coming to the end of the third webinar, which has been awesome. Thank you for everybody for joining us. A shout out to the panelists for giving up your time and everybody listening in. I hope it's been really useful for you. Like Fiona said at the start, we haven't got all the answers, but we're certainly starting to unpack some of this. We've got officials next week. So Trevor Spittle, our officials development manager, will be focusing on the topic of officials at the same time, 7 o'clock next Thursday, and that will be our last webinar in this series. Just in terms of resources, so we have a bunch of resources on our website. Please go and check them out. I've just put the links in the slides, and I will send them out to all the attendees based on youth athletics, and we have a really good resource around club development as well. We have a range of resources on there from the last conferences from years gone by, really good case studies that give you lots of detail and anecdotal evidence that you can get your teeth into and obviously apply to your own clubs. I will be sending out the PowerPoint slides from this presentation if you registered. And we do record these, so we are in a phase, our communications team's actually putting them up on the website. So the first one is up there, and then the second one goes up from webinar 2, which was inclusion and diversity, and then this one will be up very soon. Our contacts are there, so Hamish Meacham, our community manager, Fiona, our young people's lead, and thank you for doing this tonight, Fiona, up your time, and myself. So reach out if you need any support or any guidance. That's what we're here for. And I just want to say thank you for everybody, your involvement and your time this evening, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Fiona.